Hello, everyone. Just wanted to make a few remarks. Let me get into the right screen here. Make a few remarks about this week's discussion board, um, which asks you to respond to a certain question, which I think is a key question having to do with Kant's moral philosophy. And, by the end of the week, or probably before the end of the week, you should feel confident in responding to this. Obviously, there's no right answer. Do you think? Is the way that it begins. So don't worry about, you know, it's really asking your opinion, but it's asking for your considered opinion, your informed opinion about a point, which I think is quite important in Kant's moral philosophy, or about Kant's moral philosophy, and that is whether there really are categorical imperatives, or whether, in Kant's terminology, all moral imperatives, and really all imperatives, are hypothetical. That is a distinction that you should feel comfortable with, a distinction between categorical imperatives and hypothetical imperatives. Now, this is covered in the videos, it's part of the reading, but you should be able to explain in your own language what Kant meant by a categorical imperative. That's key. That's absolutely key to this course. I mean, you should just feel comfortable with that. I mean, we know that we have two examples, two specific categorical imperatives, the one about universalizability and the one about respect for persons. But explaining why they're called categorical imperatives is quite important. So, really, key is that you be able to unpack that term, categorical imperatives, and explain what an imperative is and what it means for an imperative to be categorical, and then contrasting that with hypothetical imperatives, what it means for an imperative to be hypothetical. This should all become clear through this week's reading, but just a couple of pointers here. The easiest part is that an imperative is a command, an order. The harder part is, okay, so we're dealing with commands or orders, like we're being told to do something or to not do something in an imperative. The harder part is distinguishing categorical versus hypothetical. Now, categorical imperatives, as we know, are unconditional, whereas hypothetical imperatives are. The hypothetical imperative always has either an explicit or an implied if. And that could always be put in the form of, if you want this, then you must do that. But the if is important because there it's asking, well, do you want this? So an imperative like take care of your teeth, which is good advice. Always brush your teeth, floss your teeth. There's an implied if, because if you want to avoid losing your teeth, then you should brush and floss your teeth. But if you don't, but the implication is, like, if you don't care about losing your teeth, then don't. Why? There's no reason to brush or floss, right? Um, if you want to play pool well, you need to develop a good bridge. Right? So if you want to be a good pool player, develop a good bridge, the way you hold or the way you steady the pool cue, which is a big part of my life at my earlier age. Um, if you want to be a good pool, if you don't care, just have fun and do whatever you want. Don't worry about your bridge. Just have fun with your friends, right? I mean, the if there is saying that it's optional, basically. If you want this, and that's optional, maybe you don't want this, then you must do that. Right? That's a hypothetical imperative. Hypothetical imperative, it always has an if. It has a condition. Whereas a categorical imperative, like Kant's, what he would call a moral imperative, is unconditional. It has no if. It just simply says categorically, without any conditions, do this or don't do that. So that the two categorical imperatives that we're familiar with, the one about universalizability and the one about not using persons as means to an end, they're meant to be exceptionless and unconditional. They just say, always act so your maxim of action can serve as a universal law. Always. No conditions, no ifs, no exceptions. Always treat other persons and yourself, always as an end in themselves, never as a mere means to an end. That is a rule that is unconditional, exceptionless, and categorical in the sense that it just says do this or don't do that. So the question here is whether you really buy into Kant's idea that there are categorical imperatives. Because think about what that means. The categorical imperative would mean that there are moral rules that are universal, that is applied to all rational creatures, including all human beings. So that's the first, let's say, obstacle to the thing, that there are universal moral rules. And secondly, that there are moral rules that apply to everyone and are exceptionless, so that circumstances, particular situations and their details don't matter. These rules must always be followed. So what I'm really asking you is whether you really buy into, and you may or may not buy into, the Kantian idea that there are indeed categorical imperatives, at least two of them, that everybody all the time must, if they want to be moral, act so that their rule of action, their maxim of action, can serve as universal law. That would be, do you believe that is actual? That could be, that is something that all people need to follow at all times. And the other one about respect for persons, that all people at all times must, without exception, always treat other persons as ends in themselves rather than as means to one of their ends. So I think that this question, whether there really are categorical imperatives, is really the question that all of us need to ask ourselves when we are thinking about Kant's philosophy. Because if we don't think that there are categorical imperatives, really, then we can't be Kantians. We can appreciate Kant's philosophy, we can maybe learn from it in certain respects, but we can't be Kantians. If we do think there are categorical imperatives, then maybe we could be Kantians. So I think it's a quite a central question when we're thinking about Kant's moral philosophy. Get away from my Latin homework.